Hi there, welcome back to the McCall's Quilting Parisian Grace Quilt-Along. I'm Laura Roberts and I'm so happy you're back with me today, and we're going to be making D blocks. I'm going to show you how those go together. Again, they're really simple. They're using the same units you've been making your blocks from the whole time, except we're going to do one thing new and put some together in a pinwheel. So let's get started here. I've got the units for my block all laid out here, and I'm going to show you something. If you look at these, do you look at these and think, that's the same unit? They're exactly alike? Well, they're not. I'm going to show you how that's different. You're probably seeing it already, but just in case you're not. Okay, I'm going to turn them so they're in the same orientation, like that. And what's different is this one. That piece square, the fabrics trade places. And it's really easy when you're working with these fabrics to get the wrong guy, in that place and not catch it until the end. If you want to make your block like that and just leave it, that's fine. But if you want it to look like the quilt here, you're going to want to kind of keep an eye on these, okay? So here are the units that make those little corner units. And all you're doing, you're using the same ones for each of these. All you're doing is changing the orientation of that one when you sew them together. So that's one little thing to know about the D blocks. And then another thing about the D blocks are the flying geese. Okay, there's one, and there's one there. You see that? They're the same, except here you're using this fabric, and here you're using this fabric. Okay, the red one, the rust, with the cream floral is the same on all of them. All four are the same, all right? So one thing you don't want to do, it's really easy when you're looking at diagrams and things to kind of blow past that little diagram that says make 16 of these or make 8 of those, whatever, and just go to the bigger diagram that shows the finished unit. If you do that, you're going to end up making, all of them out of this fabric and none out of this. So do kind of follow along and just know that there are 3 different types in this block. Okay, put those guys back. All right, now this is the center. It's a pinwheel. And I haven't shown you how to do a pinwheel yet, so that's what I'm going to show you today. I have gone ahead and made piece squares the same way we've been doing them. You draw the line down the diagonal on the wrong side of the lighter fabric. You sew 1/4 of an inch to either side, cut it up the middle, and press them open. Okay, press toward the dark side. And I'm going to sew those into a pinwheel like this. I'm going to lay them out first to make sure that I have them in the right position. It's really easy with the pinwheel to see when something's not right. There you go. So I know I'm going to put them together like this. So I'm just going to pick that up and fold it over like that. I'm going to take it to the machine. Okie doke. So I've got it right here, just as you always do. I'm just going to go ahead. I've already got my little thread catcher, and I'm just going to sew right along there with a 1/4 inch seam. Now down here, these guys are butted together because they were both pressed toward the dark side. So they just nest together really nicely. There's one, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and fold that over and pick up that pair, bring it back over here. Okay, and I'm going to just sew that seam. Alrighty, like that. There we go. Okie doke. And just cut the thread off. Snip. And my little thread catcher dude. All right. I'll leave that ready to go. Okay, back over here. I'm going to press them open. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to lay them out first, so I can decide which way I want to press them open. Okay, there they are. If I press one this way, like that, and press this one the other way, they're going to nest together well. And what's happening? It's pressing toward the dark side. Because really, if you press them in the same direction and turn one around, they'll nest. That's true of any of them. Okay. So pressing toward the dark side. I'm going to put the dark side up, the dark side where it's closest to that seam line, and then press, because that way, that's the press toward the dark. There we go. You hear that? Okay, I'm going to do the same thing here. I know that dark's on top, like that. Okay, and I'm going to make sure, I'll turn it over, and look at that. I felt it when I pressed it. I felt that get a little strange. I turn over, I'm just going to repress that one the way it's supposed to be. And I'll check that one. Yeah, that's fine. Give that one a little bit more. Like that. Okay. They're good to go. And again, I'm going to put them back. So I know I've got them in the right place. And I'm going to turn them over, face them face to face. And this does butt up against. Okay, you really can feel that. If you haven't done this, obviously you've done these with your other blocks, but if this was the first time you were doing it, and if you're trying to teach someone else, tell them to feel, and you can tell if they're right or not. And here, I'm going to be sewing across where those two meet. Okay, that's to get my point the way I want it. Now you can pin through there if you want. I don't usually, but I'll show you how. It's the same as before, where you're going to pin right there. You come in right where those little points are. Okay. There, like that. And I'll put it back down into this guy, whoops, in the same place, like this. Okay, get that thread out of the way so you can see right in there. Okay, so I'm going to put that pin down, and you're just going to hold it vertically, like that, and pin to either side. Okie doke. Holding it vertically, and I'm feeling to make sure is that nested. Yes, it is. Butted up against each other, nested, however you want to say it. And here's a tip. Okay, you can tell if you're doing this right, if it's going to align properly. If you go down here now, I'm pinning at this end. Over here, I'm not pinning yet. I can feel that those aren't nested. They're the ones on top of the other, and I'm just going to kind of wiggle that like that. There. Now I can feel that that's correct, which means that it'll be correct along the edges. Okay, go ahead, put a pin in there, and take out the center one. Back to the machine. Alrighty, here we go. Okay, so what do you do when you are looking at your fabric? Oops, you're looking at something you're going to sew to something else, and you'll see that this is longer than that one. Right, it's okay as long as when you sew them the next time, you remember that this bigger one is the correct 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can measure, if you want to, you can go ahead and measure to see which one is the correct size before you sew them together. I know that that one is. So don't worry if things are a little offset there, because they'll just have a different seam allowance when they're sewn to the next piece. All right? Now sometimes, you know, if you're pressing, it doesn't press all the way open, or when you're sewing, sometimes things just get a little weird. Okay, but it's all right, because as long as you can hide all kinds of things in a seam allowance, unless, of course, you're sewing on camera, and the whole world gets to see the back of your blocks, then you can't do it so much. But you can, but all right, here we go. Now that is all done. And I'm just going to cut that off. And see how that goes right through there? That's just what I wanted to have happen. So let's take a look. Did it happen over here too? Yep, it did, right through. So that means when I open it, I'm going to have a nice center. Oops, I'm going to come over here. I'm just going to set the seam like that. And then open it up. And look at that, they're all come together just the way I want them to. Now, I'm not going to press that seam allowance to one side, because it would just be really thick on one side and really thin on the other. So this is one of those ones where I'm going to press it open. There are people who never press anything open, and that's fine too. If you're not comfortable with that, you sure don't have to do it. I just think that a lot of blocks end up better, because when I'm pressing it open, it divides that thickness like that. There we go. Okay. And then it doesn't have quite the, you can have a whoop up in the middle of a pinwheel like that. All right, I pressed it, and that one opened up again. I'm just going to press that back. There. Okay. And so you won't have anyone looking at the back of yours. There we go. If I'm worried about this being bigger than this one, what I can do is just put a ruler over it. You want that to be 4.5 inches before you sew it into anything else. If this is 4.5 inches from here to here, I just put that in my little memory bank and know that I'm going to be aligning here with the big ones. If this is 4.5 inches, the small one, I'll take it and with my ruler, I'll just trim. When you trim though, you need to make darn sure you're not trimming like this. If I were going to trim this guy with a rotary cutter to be even, watch what can happen. Okay, so I trim that off like that. You know, I'm just making it even. Okay, do you see what's happened here? How that's no longer coming to the corner, all right, that line, that seam line. That's not a good thing. You're better off, if you're gonna trim this way and it's come to the corner before, you're gonna have to actually trim in both directions. So really measure before you trim anything. You can ease things. If you have a little extra, it's better to ease than to cut off and have this happening, because now in order for this to be correct, you're going to have to sew in here to get that 1/4 inch and still be on the seam. Okay? All right, we'll get rid of that guy. And now I'm going to sew my block rows together. Hi guys. I love fabric. There we go. There I am talking to fabric again. Okay, so when I lay this out, I'm going to make sure that I have these the way they're supposed to be. So this triangle, that fabric, and there, like that, to make sure it's match. I don't want to do that, okay? You want to make sure that these guys match those guys. Okay, back, like that. All right, time to sew them together. I'm just going to take this one. Going to do that little nesting thing. You can absolutely pin yours if you want to. I'm not going to pin mine. You know how now. Okay. So, come on thingy. And line everything up. All right, there we go. Better grab my awl. Okay, it helps to feed things under here. If you've ever put the machine needle through your finger, which I have done twice, you'll find that you end up just feeling more comfortable if you have something like this around. Okay, and I can see where those match. I can look right here and see where that point is and that point. Okay, I can feel that. I know where I need them to be. Again, feel free to use pins. If you're more comfy with pins, there's nothing wrong with using them. Okay. On the other hand, if you don't need them, you don't have to use them, even if your mom says, oh, you should, or your best friend. Okay, line those guys, and so right on through. There we go. Poor machine. I kind of stopped it right before the big hump. Okay, so that one's sewn. And while I'm sitting here, I'm just going to fold this one over like that. Okay, and I'm going to sew that one too. And ready. This one's similar in that I have a point. Now I'm going to want to sew through that intersection, and I want that intersection to align with that seam. Now I can tell, usually if you've been sewing carefully, if you have these corners aligned, if you align your corners, your points are going to be fine. If you have your 1/4 inch seam allowance and your corners are aligned, everything should be just fine. Like that. There we go. Now, do you see right here that bottom fabric is sticking out? You see that? It's not aligned like I want it to be. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm putting my hand underneath here, and I'm just going to tug that little guy over like that. You see that? It's disappeared now. And I'm just going to sew right on down, still holding that. Okay, until I get past that point. I'll tell you a secret. Nobody's going to be looking inside your quilt. And here's another secret. or some people really care about their points. And I like my points to look nice and neat, have them come just to that seam allowance, but you don't have to. There's no, the quilt police aren't real unless you're entering your quilts in a competition, and then every little detail matters. It's okay if your points don't match. If you don't mind and it's not something that matters to you, go for it. You don't have to have them match. So don't let someone tell you, oh, you're doing that wrong, unless you want to do it this way, unless you want your points to match. And if you do want your points to match and you're having a hard time with it, there are lots of things you can look in, like McCall's magazine. If we go to the website, mccallsquilting.com, there are beginner quilting lessons. You can look at those. And often, if you just go to your quilt store, go to your local quilt shop, say, gee, my points aren't showing. I'm not getting my points to match. Someone will show you how right then and there, and then you just practice, okay? So I'm going to take this guy over here, like there, and this guy that we just did. There we go. And see, that's the same that way and that way. You don't have to worry about it. Excuse me. Oh, I'm just going to press this guy out. Now this is that middle row, and I've got these two pressing out like that. So when I get up here, if these are going out, I'm going to want these guys to go in, both top and bottom. So when I press that, I'm going to have that going in. But before I do that, I'm just going to add that guy on, and then I'll press them both at the same time. I just need to get this guy in the right orientation, and then fold him over like that, and take it to the machine. All right, my glasses on. And I'm going to do just what I did before. I'm just kind of nesting those guys together. Get my little thread tail in there. Okay. Now it looks like I use a thread tail all the time, which I do. When you're chain piecing, you're only going to have one, and then you'll have like 20 little units you've pieced. So it's not as though I have to run through 29,000 of them. But when I'm trimming something off, like when I trim off those, the little corners when I'm doing pieced squares, that's what I use. I use those, or anything else that just is handy. Okay, I can feel that one. And I'm going to sew this time. It can be sort of weird to look at it this way. Do you see? You can't see where this seam is going into that seam, but you can kind of, you just kind of extrapolate it with your head. You just kind of show, oh, okay, it's going to be about there. And again, if you've got that 1/4 inch seam allowance right, it'll go right where you want it. Okay, now let's just finish that guy up. There we go. And I'll go press it. Okay, here we go. Ready to go. I'm going to press this guy, move these guys forward a little bit. And remember, the middle one goes out, so I want these to go in. Like that. Excuse me. Alrighty. Fabric dust. It's kind of like pixie dust, except you don't get a fly. Okay. That's better. If I have a lot of seam allowance fabric, I find it can be easier to move, to handle if I have that little bit of moisture from the starch. And then, of course, when it gets pressed, it sets up, so it doesn't make it too wonky. There, and then I'll just last little press from the top. There we go. Okay. Now, I press my rows, sew my rows together like this. Ta-da! So, same thing. I'm going to fold it onto itself like that and take it over to the machine. And you can pin if you want or not, depending on how you feel about it. And in every case, when you're matching things, if you want your points to match, you're always doing it on a seam like that. And those are the points you're matching. Sometimes, if you come here to this one, you have a point there. You don't have a point here. You just have that seam. You want the point on that line. Okay? Sometimes if you don't know what your goal is, don't know what you're shooting for, it can be hard to reach it. Okay, let's get you just the right way. That's the way I want you. There's that little extra ear. See how that's just sticking out? I know that's not the actual edge. The actual edge is here. So I'm aligning with the actual edge like that. It's really hard to be perfect when you're sewing. There we go. All right, now I'm not pinning because I can find not pinning. I'm just gonna go feel that guy. There we go. Now, if you're having a hard time, if you have sewn a seam and nothing's matching and everything's just kind of off, or you have a problem, let's say every time you make blocks, they're always too small or too large, well, then it makes sense to pin. And the other thing is, if your blocks or your units are always turning out too big, it means your seam allowance is too small. You need to take up a little more. It's the same thing, if all of your units you do piece squares, and instead of being 2 inches when you sew them into something, they're 2 and an eighth, or 1 7/8. If your piece is not big enough, you're taking too big of a seam allowance. So getting that 1/4 inch seam allowance right is really, really important. If you need help with that, again, McCallsQuilting.com, there's some basic lessons, including one about that 1/4 inch seam allowance and getting it right. So you got lots of help, and no reason you have to be miserable and have things not working out the way you want them to. Okay, I'm just going to sew that on like that. Get my awl in there. Now, do you see how this point here, I'm going to try and make it so you can see it. Let's put the needle down and I'll get the foot out of the way. Okay, when I was bringing this toward here, it's here instead of here. Okay, let me show you that again. Whoops, wrong way. Okay, so if I keep sewing, do you see that's not going to sew where I want it to? So what I'm going to do, I'll bring that, press the foot up again, put it back where I was sewing, like that. I can just move that over like that, hold the awl and get it lined up where I want it, and then just go ahead and sew right on down there, like that, okay? So if that's not going in the way I want it to, I can just adjust it right here. Okay, get that next one ready to go. Okay, and just stitch right along. Almost done with this row. Okay, when I'm sewing at home, I listen to books on tape or music. And I had a really interesting experience this weekend. I was sewing and I had my iPod so that it was on shuffle. And I'm sewing along and all of a sudden Bad to the Bone comes on. Well, if you have Bad to the Bone on and you're sewing, you can get a little carried away and sew a little too fast. And if you're sewing too fast, you can do things like do it wrong and have to do it over again, which is what I did. Amazing how that environment affects what you're doing, including too much coffee. Okay, there we go. There, so that long seam is done. Everything looks fine. I'm not going to bother pressing that one yet because I'm going to sew this one to it. Ta-da. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing. There we go. I usually do that final aligning once I've got it in the machine. It just has something to hold it. Get up to one of these big thick ones, get everything under there. Okay. I love the sound of a machine. I like the way it just kind of hums along. And oh, there we go. Now it's important when you're quilting like this, when you're piecing, when you're making a quilt, that you're not like wanting to get through it. Oh, I can't wait till this is done. And so enjoy the process. Enjoy the fabric. Enjoy the sound of your machine. Don't just be so focused on getting the quilt done that you don't enjoy the time you're using making it. Because this way, if you enjoy the time you have, that you spend sewing, when you've got that quilt done, you have a quilt, but you also have several hours of happiness behind you. All right, clip those off, bring it over here. Okay, I'm going to press. At home, I have a big iron, of course, and so pressing at home is a little bit more thorough. All right, there you go. You can see how that's going to look. And I'm going to sew on the frame fabrics, the strips. Which one should I do? I think I'll do this one first. All right, so I'm going to sew the frame on, and I'll be right back to show you what it looks like when it's all done. And here it is. Ta-da! My big, beautiful block. Isn't that lovely? So I'm thrilled that you're still with me on this, and I think you're going to enjoy making yours and putting the frames on. So your homework this week is to go ahead and do your D blocks. And of course, you're going to have 2 different blue frames. And the next time we get together, we'll be making our E blocks. So if you haven't got your kit and you love these fabrics, go to mccallsquilting.com/quiltalong, and you'll find that you can order them right there. And again, I just want to thank FOF and Moda for sponsoring our quilt-alongs, because that way I get to play with the FOF and pet the Moda fabrics. So I'll see you next time, and I hope you enjoy your sewing this week.